Hello there, Inky Fingers here. Now, if you do a bog standard watercolour, how do you shade? To do that, you just mix darker washes of watercolour and paint over. That gives you your shadow areas, all your shading, it's all done. But what happens if you do a pen drawing and you're not using watercolour? How do you shade then? How do you get dynamics and contrasts? Well, of course, you use what's called hatching and or cross-hatching, using fine tipped pens. A very simple technique, but one that can look very, very nice. Plus, there's another thing you can do right at the very end to make your work even better. If you want to know more, stay tuned, find out the secret little technique, which will just add an extra bit of pizzazz to your drawings. So let's get down to it, shall we? Equipment wise, hatching and cross hatching is usually done with fine line pens. We have a few examples here, a couple of fine liners, and this is like more of a technical drawing pen. But we have here 005, 003 in the fine liners, and we have a 05 in the technical drawing pen. Now, technically, I suppose you could do hatching with any size pen, but as we're doing hatching usually to do shadow areas, then you want the finest pen you can get. Now, for example, this is the 0.03, and that's the line we get. The 0.05. Not much difference. We have now we use a technical drawing pen, the 05. Is a much thicker line, and just for examples, we'll use a 0.3 technical fine liner pen, which has got a far thicker tip, but really it's not that much difference. So any one of these you could do hatching, shading in your pen work. But for this example, I'm going to be using a thinner pen. In this example, I'll be using the 003 Unipin fine liner. Now, simply hatching is when we do lines in one direction. Like so. Now, if you want to make this darker, then you can just go over again and it gets darker. Again, you want it darker, then you just continue in the one direction to how dark you want whatever you're actually shading. Now, cross-hatching is where you go in different directions. So, for example, we'll do our hatching first in the same direction as this example, which is very light. But then, to make it darker, we cross-hatch, we go in a different direction. So this was vertically, I'm now going to go horizontally. We can see it's a little bit darker, and then we can go on a diagonally. It gets darker. We can go over again if you want it darker, and this time we'll do it diagonally again, but as we've just done the direction this way, we'll now change it opposite and do it this way, and that'll give us a darker line. If you want it darker, then you just continue and you go in an opposite direction of what you've just been. and I'll leave that halfway so you can see the sort of the difference. And doing it this way, you can get a really dark solid mass if you want to. So that's hatching. It's just in one way. Cross hatching is you're doing the same thing, but you're changing the direction over each pass. Now for another example, I've got 4 cubes, and in these cubes we will have a flat wash, because of course we can do whole buildings just with a pen, no watercolor whatsoever. But again, we'll do ink and wash, line and wash, pen and wash, depends on how you want to call it, which you will have watercolor, and then you would have the outline and pen, which would be this example. We'll have watercolor on this cube, but then with some hatching to form a shade. Then this example, we're going to do some hatching with the pen only, no watercolor. And in this final example, we'll have some cross hatching. So for example 1, this is going to be our watercolor. So we need a wash. And how you would do shading and shadows in this example is simply paint the whole cube with a single color. Now in these examples, we're going to make sure we know that the sun is going to come from this direction. So what that's going to do is that the top of the cube is going to be the lightest. This left hand side of the cube is going to be slightly in shadow, and this side of the cube is going to be in deep shadow. Now this wash has dried, so to get a 3-dimension on this cube, we need to add another wash. Now this is exactly the same wash. It's no stronger, no lighter. And what we need to do now is to put a second coat on just the shadow areas. So now we automatically have the lighter wash at the top. We let that dry, and then when that's dry, we put another wash, same wash, no darker, no lighter, but we put another wash on the right hand side, and that's going to form our 3-dimensional cube. Now it's dry, we'll do the final wash on the right hand side. And once again, as I've said, this is the same wash. I haven't added anything, I haven't strengthened it, or I haven't lightened it. But now we have the third wash. We can see this is much darker because of the nature of watercolor. So we now have a 3-dimensional cube, light on the top, darker on the left hand side, and much darker on the right. And we wouldn't do anything else with that, because that's a form of pen and wash. So you've done you can either do the outline first and then put the wash on, or do the wash first and then put the outline in the pen. So this example would be, we've done the washes, the picture's pretty much completed, and all we need to do is to put outline with the pen to sort of bring it together. And we'll just use the darker areas of the watercolor washes for the shading. Now for this example, I'm going to do exactly the same, though I'm not going to show it on camera because it's going to be identical to this. And when this is done, we'll use some hatching with the pen to add added texture and depth to this cube. Now this cube is dry, I'm now going to put some hatch work in, again using just the 003 pen. So if you remember, the sun is coming from this general direction, so the top of the cube is going to be the lightest, so we don't touch this. This side of the cube, the left hand side, is going to have some shadow, so we'll have to do some ink work on this. This side of the cube is going to be in the deepest shadow, so we're going to have more hatching. So what we're going to do here is simply, with a very light touch. Now when you hatch, if you want it lighter, then you just have actually more space between the lines, and the more of the original wash underneath will show through. So that's give it a little bit of extra tone. Now on this side we can push down a little bit with the pen. We can also have these lines more closer together, which automatically will give it a darker tone. And instantly we can see we've got a much more of a tonal valued cube. But I am going to go over this once more, which will darken it even more. But I am going in the same direction all the time. And the final result is a much more solid three-dimensional cube. Light on the top, slight shading on the left hand side, and much darker shading on the right. Now you could go over this again if you wanted it darker, but I think this is sufficient. Now for our third example, we're just going to be using hatching only. So we're going to have, again, we're going to have a tone on the top, darker tone on the left hand side, even darker tone on the right. But what I would do on something like this, just for hatching, because remember hatching is only going in one direction, we're going to have to make sure that we have the shape of the cube. When in art, when you're doing things, you draw things in the way they go or grow, or paint things in the way they go or grow. So in this example, the side views, the side walls, I'm going to be doing the vertical, and on the top, now if I do a vertical, it will actually look like it's an empty box, no lid on. So on the top I'm going to be doing some hatching this way, and that will make sure that the top looks flat. So just lightly with the pen, leaving some nice gaps between the pen lines, so that will automatically make it a lighter tone. Now this side, again, we can be a little bit harder on the pen. We can have the gaps between the lines a little bit closer. That will darken it slightly. And then on this side, we can have again the lines closer together. But what we'll do, of course, when this side is done, we'll go back over it, and that will automatically make it darker. So again, back over, we'll just do one more, and that gives us again a three-dimensional cube, just hatching. Now for our final example, we're going to be cross-hatching. So this means we do hatching first, and then we go different directions to make it darker. So again, the top, nice and light. the side. And the right hand side, which is going to be the darkest area. Just same thing exactly, because this is hatching first, then we cross over in a different direction and it transforms it into cross hatching. So that's the hatching done. Now I'm going to cross hatch on the darkest side. So we could do it diagonally first, or this way. 6 and 2 3s. It's what you want, what you fancy. But I'm going to do it this way on a diagonal. Like so, and I'm still not finished. I want this shadow even darker, so I've gone vertically, I've gone diagonally this way, I've gone diagonally that way, so I'm going to now go horizontally. And that's give us a nice darker right hand side. So now this is done. I don't want it any darker than this with this pen work. This we cannot touch, but this side now we can see it's too much like this, so we can now do a bit of cross hatching on this side just to darken it up, but not as much as this. This is why I did this area first. So I've got the darkest, the lightest, and now we can do the mid-tones correctly. So this, I'm just going to do a bit of diagonal. And that, I think, will do for that. We've got 3 distinct tones. And then if you want to really make it sort of like a 3-dimension, the sun's coming down here, we could, of course, do a little bit of a shade, a shadow. So that would be just hatch, and then cross hatch, exactly like we did earlier on. Cross hatch this way, maybe do another that way, and we've got a shadow. But it's just a nice 3-dimensional cube. So at the end of this little experiment, we have, what do we have? So once again, we have the flat wash, just watercolor to dictate the tones. Again, flat wash with some hatching. Now the hatching, of course, it gives this it gives the wash underneath some nice texture. Now if you're only going to do pen work, then we have hatching only. We can do this, and it gives a nice bit of 3 dimensions. And then, but of course, my favourite is with pen. It's the cross hatching, which you can see you get a nice, very nice texture on whatever you're doing. Now there is one other thing we can do, which I often do, to enhance the tonal values of this area, and that is using a bottled ink and actually putting a very dilute wash of ink over this area, and that's just going to darken it up even more. Now what I have is I have several bottles of ink. When the original ink is all being used up, I keep the bottles and I put a little bit of undiluted ink in and just fill it up in various amounts of water. So this, for example, is very dilute. That's not as dilute, but it is quite dilute still, and this is a touch stronger. So we can do watercolor washes, type washes, but it's not watercolor, it's ink. So if you do just a pen and ink drawing, we can enhance the shadows if we want with a bit of ink itself, and then you can say it's still 100% ink. So quick example of how this ink is. That's it, it's very dilute. But because we've already got tonal values on here, when we put the ink on, even though this is very dilute, very light, it will enhance the shadow areas. So it's just a wash, but a wash with ink. Go over the shadow area here. And look how much this is enhanced, and it's still 100% ink. If we wanted to make this, now this is darker, this is too light, then once again, all we need to do is put an ink wash over there, and because the hatch work on this side is not as dark as this, it will automatically appear lighter. And so you've got a really nice three-dimensional cube here. And now, just to finish off, I'm just going to show a couple of bits and bobs, a few pieces of work I've done in the past to show exactly this. Now this is a piece, it's the Jodrell Bank Radio Telescope, lovely bit of architecture. Now if we look in closely, we can see the cross-hatching going all along there. On this area where the dish goes around, I've only put hatching in the direction of the dish is going. The inside of the dish, we can see it's just a very thin wash of ink, just like I've shown you, and there's some little bits of hatching very faintly just going in one direction in the shape of the dish, so it shows the shape. The second example, this is off York Minster and some surrounding houses in the front. But in this example, if you're looking close, we can see in the shadow areas here, we can see the crisscrosses where the cross hatching is. You can see it here, all in the shaded areas. Whereby on this area, now this is still in shadow, but you can see the lines are vertical. So I've just got hatching here, because it's not as dark as the shadow areas. So cross hatching here in the shading, in the dark shadows, where it doesn't need to be dark, we can have some hatching. And once again, on the shaded areas, the shadow areas, it's once the hatching and cross hatching has been completed, it's just a thin application of weak ink. And finally, another piece, again just pen and ink. If we look up closely, we can see the hatching or cross hatching just in this area here, where it's going diagonally in this way, and then it's going diagonally the opposite way. It gives a nice bit of texture. When we get to underneath the roof, underneath in the deep shade, we can see the cross hatching goes every single way, vertically, horizontally, diagonally, both ways, and then some verticals again to really darken this up. And then again, when all the hatching, all the shading's done with the pen, I went in with a brush and that very same dilute ink, and I just put a wash over, which enhances it incredibly nicely. and it makes it much more of an impressive sort of shadow colour. And it is still 100% ink. And there you go. That's how you do shading in pen and ink. It's very easy to do. And as I've just shown you at the very end, if you get a bottle of ink, dilute it, and then just go over the shaded areas, the hatching or cross-hatching areas, put an inky wash over them, and you get a really, really nice contrasty looking picture. A perfect finishing off technique. Now, I hope you enjoyed this little demonstration. Now, if you would like to see more of this type of thing, and you haven't already subscribed, then please subscribe. Subscriptions help the channel enormously. So until next time, I'll say goodbye. So, goodbye.